It's 1:41 p.m. on Friday, the 7th of September, 2012. I'm Mark Strassman in Los Angeles. I'm talking to David Brin, author of Existence. He's in Encinitas, California. Welcome to Utopia News.
Great to be here, Mark, and hello to everybody.
How long did it take you to write Existence from concept to publication?
Well, from concept to publication was about 8 years. It took the longest of any of my books. Of course, I was doing some things in parallel during that time. I've been very, very busy. But this was a big book. It's got 1 million symbols in it, or letters, or spaces. And stringing those symbols together is the modern magic. And 95% of our fellow citizens can scan these little squiggles with their eyes and decrypt big thoughts or shallow ones.
Well, no, they were pretty big. Tell us what use you make of pre-readers in your process.
Well, as with most established authors, I get a lot of mail from would-be new authors who want to learn the craft, and unlike most of my peers, I always answer, though often it's to point out that along the left side of my website, davidbrin.com, there's, if you scan down, you can find an essay and a photo, a YouTube, of advice to new writers. And one of the things I recommend is that people overcome the natural human tendency to reject criticism, to hate criticism. If you were learning to be a silversmith, apprenticed to Paul Revere, you would expect to get your knuckles rapped a whole lot of times. You would expect to say, no, don't do it that way. And yet somehow when we write, we expect to, be able to write like Athena, jumping fully grown from the brow of Zeus. No, you have to develop your craft. And I learned from a family of journalists to appreciate criticism, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. So I still circulate my manuscript, even though I'm a modern master of science fiction. I'm always trying something new, and therefore I'm always a novice. So I still have the habit of circulating my manuscripts to 40 or 50 pre-readers. I thank them all at the back of my books. You can see the proof there. I consider it to be quality control. I want to know if the experimental thing I'm doing in this book is working. I'd like to know where the reader was able to put down the book, even if it was to go to work or to go to sleep or to fix meals for their kids. If 2 or more of my pre-readers put down the book in the same place, I'll tighten that, because it's my job to make it hard to put the book down, even to feed your kids. It's a troublemaking profession, but if I succeed in that, then you'll buy my next book.
Okay, tell us why you decided to include several series of nonfiction discussions about possible sources of civilizational collapse and explanations of the Fermi paradox as part of the book.
Well, John Dos Passos, in his Depression-era book, USA, invented this approach of saying you have your main point of view characters, and you're telling a story from their point of view. But in between each chapter, there are little snippets of the world. A news report here, an argument between civic leaders there, an extract from an encyclopedia. And these together give you little snippet interludes between the chapters that enrich the texture of this world that the author is showing you. John Brunner, who was the greatest science fiction author of the 1960s, in his epical novel Stand on Zanzibar, he used this same technique. And I imitated it with apparently some substantial success, at least according to most people, in my 1989 novel, Earth. And one of the things I would stick between the chapters there were the things that later I realized would be called web pages. But in 1989, we had, different tentative names for such things: hypertext, hypercard, and so my fans keep a website, a wiki, keeping track of all the predictions from Earth that came true, or some that didn't, and some I really wish wouldn't come true. In existence, I went back to that well, and back to that technique, because the number of ideas per book, per chapter, per page in that book is more than I've had in any other book. You get your money's worth. And again, that's why I had so many pre-readers, because it's terribly important when a book is that idea rich or that idea dense to have the entertaining story of the characters always be punching forward. Because you have to remember, no matter how many ideas you're trying to talk about, the story comes first.
Okay, say something substantively about those possible sources of collapse that you reference in your comments.
Well, as people can guess, if they go and watch the lavish 3-minute preview trailer for Existence, they can see that through my website at davidbrin.com, with wonderful, wonderful artwork by the great Patrick Farley. As you can guess from that, the word existence is meant literally. It's whether or not human existence will continue. The Fermi paradox is the question of what happened to all the other species out there, the other intelligent species that the Drake equation suggests ought to be out there, ought to still be out there now, filling the galaxy with radio waves and talk and conversation. We should see signs of their past visits to the Earth, not just, relics of the visit, but also in Earth's biology. Because if they had flushed the toilet during the 2 billion years that Earth was prime real estate, with only single-cell organisms in the ocean, it would have changed the history of life on Earth, and we'd see it in our rocks. So civilization seems to be sparse, very rare in our galaxy. This presumption, by the way, could turn out to be wrong tomorrow. And as an astronomer, I've been involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence very intensely. But the question that Fermi raised after the Manhattan Project one day during a bull session was, so you think these aliens are out there? Where are they? And some of the possible explanations, everybody always says, I know the explanation, and that's very foolish. I've cataloged about 100, and some more plausible than others. And among those more plausible explanations are at least a dozen that are very, very pessimistic about our prospects for survival. Or perhaps we're smarter than average. Perhaps we'll be the first.
All right. I want to talk a little bit about the sociology of existence. How different is the world of 2045 that you paint in the early part of the book from the real world today in terms of social and political trends, communication and media platforms, and how people get their news and what news is?
Well, in Earth in 1989, I had personal plaques that people would carry around and access the internet, and they're almost identical to today's pads. And I had people wearing primitive versions of Google goggles to access the internet. And that was 1989. Well, Werner Vinci, in his wonderful book, Rainbow's End, he takes this further from about 5 years ago and has people wearing these glasses and goggles, and how they would program the world to be overlaid. They might decide that their city, all the buildings in their city would be covered with vines and have tyrannosauruses sticking their heads over. A wonderful, wonderful depiction of possible future. I took that a step farther and explored what augmented reality might mean to people out on the street. Their instant access to information. The fact that our controllers, twiddlers in our hands or waving our arms in front of us would be considered primitive and crude. There'd be the beginnings of being able to control computers neurologically or mentally, but we would have implants in our teeth where you could tap and scroll and do all those things very quickly and pick up subvocal vibrations that you sort of almost speak but don't quite. So the world of 2045 is different than today. It's gone through some pretty terrible things, and yet muddled on, because that's what people do. And they're dealing with several crises at once when suddenly an astronaut pulls in something from space. It's only about that big. It can't do anything to us. But if there really are creatures inside, they can certainly mess with our heads.
Talk about the big deal that you reference in your alternative history account of the future.
Well, the big deal is related to what in Earth I called the Helvetian War. And that is the notion that the world's middle classes are probably going to get pretty fed up by the year 2020. And by this, I don't just mean the American middle class, which has been under severe strain for a decade and is starting to really show signs of remembering what we had a revolution about, but also the rising world middle class. There's good news and bad news. The good news is tremendous. Over 2/3 of the people on this planet right now are in what you might call middle class, in that they have a secure apartment that has electricity, that has potable water and sanitation, a primitive washing machine, some access to the internet, and their children don't have to work, their children go to school. Well, that is impressive. And we could talk about how that came about and how much further we have to go to help those who haven't joined this. But these world middle classes are holding on just barely because in so many of these countries, their own leaders have been turned into kleptocrats and have squirreled away not billions, not tens of billions, not hundreds of billions, but trillions of dollars in secret accounts overseas. And in Earth, I talk about the Helvetian War, in which the world's middle classes demanded the bank records from Switzerland and the Cayman Islands and places like that.
So that's very current, because people are demanding those of Mitt Romney right now.
Yes, well, that's one of the things that people score on that wiki for successful predictions from the novel Earth. In existence, what I suggest is 2045, they look back on this thing called the Big Deal, where there was no such war, but there was a deal made among all of the 10 estates of the world, including the people, which is the 9th estate, and the aristocrats, the oligarchs, who have reclaimed some of their position that they had before the American Revolution, because who's going to stop them? And the governments and scientists and all the other estates, including AI, which is the 10th estate. And they made a deal. And the deal forestalled a violent struggle over these issues for a while. But by the year 2045, it's starting to fall apart again. And it gives one an excuse to explore these yins and yangs, these trade-offs. Several of my characters are in favor of a return to feudal aristocracy because they deem democracy to be a failure. Other characters disagree with this. But I try my best to give the rationalizations that each side comes up with a good, clear moment on stage.
How autobiographical is the Hamish Brookman character?
Well, I spoke it myself a bit. He's a famous science fiction author who's had a lot more movies made than I've had, and certainly has a lot more media power. And in that respect, and several others, I suppose some people have accused me of modeling him after Michael Crichton. But there are strong elements of me making fun of myself in there, because that's fun to do. You put some elements of yourself, some ways in which I'm pompous, or I talk too much, or I just poke at opinions just for the fun of it instead of actually believing in them.
So it was fun writing him.
Oh, I think he's one of the most fun characters in the book. Sure, you know, he can rationalize almost anything, and he goes in actions. And I did not really expect him to be so important to the book, especially since his name is a Tuckerized name. There's a Scottish fellow who bid on a book that I sent to a charity auction. And one of the prizes was to have your name included as a character in the book. Well, usually when I Tuckerize someone, you know, because they won at a charity auction, or it's a friend of mine, or I'm paying them back for having been really helpful to the book, usually I do a minor character. But
well, Tor, the main character I want to ask about now, is the same name as your publisher.
yeah, that's a cool name.
Okay. What combination? Okay. What combination of research and imagination did you use to create Tor's cyborg existence?
Well, we're doing amazing things when it comes to the regeneration, the support of injured people, and their regeneration of their body tissues and their bodies. It appears that about 150 million years ago, mammals became fully warm-blooded and devoted their evolution to being really quick. And therefore, they lost the ability to sit around while a limb would regrow or an organ would regrow, which is something that some reptiles and most amphibians can do. But now, 150 million years later, we're finding that the gears for a regenerating machine are still there in our genes and in our bodies. There are some amazing things being done now where scientists and doctors are finding out how to slip a certain gear in a certain place, and they can actually crank the machinery of regeneration. It's one of the most amazing things. And, you know, if you're a theological person, if you're a person of faith, it seems to be evidence that we're meant to pick up the tools of creation and become co-creators, as we tried to do back at the Tower of Babel. Now, are we going to be interfered with again? Well, actually, I have a fun YouTube that people can look up called Science-Friendly Theology. That is a recording of a speech I gave at the Singularity Conference last October, which was heaps of fun. And you see, getting to be an amateur theologian is just one more of the benefits of this profession that I'm in.
What's a fomite, and what role do they play in the book?
A fomite is a physical object that conveys disease. And, of course, you know, modern sanitation has reduced these, but you can still catch disease from some objects. Well, that is a word that some of the humans use to describe the important objects in the book.
Okay. And what's the renunciation movement in the book? And how do you feel about the continuation of progress through technological innovation?
Well, the renunciation movement is an area in which we see the anti-science propaganda that we see, especially promulgated by a certain very popular news network, taking real root. And what you see today is both the far left and the entire right in America reacting with undue hostility toward the very force that made it possible for Pax Americana to succeed and to lift 2/3 of the world's people out of poverty. More than half of the growth in the gross domestic product of the United States of America since World War II is directly attributable to science and technology. As a matter of fact, I'd love to see some millionaire establish a second national debt clock next to the first one, which is so propaganda effective in New York and Chicago and a few other cities, showing how our debt is increasing and has been ever since Bill Clinton spent 4 years paying down the debt. And this second national debt clock would show what our debt would be today if the United States government, if we, the people, through the government, charged a mere 5%, just 5% royalty on things developed by the United States government, like jet airplanes, atomic power, rockets, satellites, GPS, telecom, the internet, pharmacology, all these things, the clock would be running in the black, positive, and running forward. Now, do you get the impression that I oppose a renunciation movement that is starting to take place, both on the far left and the entire right of the American political spectrum, to turn away from science and technology? Well, one can understand emotionally the draw of this. We are in stressful times. And science is a huge draw. And you see this in the science fiction community, where not only is fantasy so popular, because it pulls on these nostalgic threads, as Tolkien did so expertly, and that Lucas tried so hard to do in his fantasy non-science fiction series called Star Wars. The point is that it's not just in fantasy. Almost all the Hugo Award nominees this year wallowed in romantic nostalgia and not in the exploration of the possibility that through science and technology we might make a world that'll have, but might be a better world overall than the one we're in. And I consider these authors to be part of the propaganda for the renunciation movement.
Okay, talk a little bit about the expansion of what it means to be human that you talk about in the book with Neanderthals, autistics, dolphins, and cyborgs, along with biologicals.
Well, look, anthropologically speaking, when a tribe is experiencing high fear levels, the horizon of who you include as a human being, as they joked around in Little Big Man, the Cheyenne considered themselves to be the human beings and everybody else not to be human beings. When the fear level is high, that boundary is really close. The boundary of what you worry about is the next meal. The boundary of who you might be willing to mate with is just the next family of cousins. As the fear level goes down, these boundaries surge outward, and instead of the next meal, you worry about the next harvest. And as the fear levels go down, the time horizon of both worry and opportunity, and who you might want to mate with, and who you consider human, these all move outward. Until Americans have been generally relaxed about where their next meal comes from, the next harvest, all these things for so many generations, that our mythology becomes science fictional. And to represent the threat horizon, we do bad aliens. To represent the, I might want to marry that horizon, there's cute, gorgeous aliens. The horizon of opportunity, of adventure, again, aliens. And who's included within the firelight? Well, ideally, according to us, all humans. You should go online and see this wonderful video of dolphins stranding themselves on the beach just recently, and tourists running in and pulling them out to shore, to sea. Instantly. What would their great-great-grandparents have done upon seeing the same scene? They would have run just as fast to the beach, and their thought would have been lunch. So the issue is, I talk about it in my book Otherness, about the dogma of otherness. This expansion is something that is a constant stress within our culture. Have a reflex of feeling resentment if they're being guilt-tripped into this expansion too fast. Hence the problems over gay marriage and all that. Residual racism. But the far left is no better because they're addicted to this expansion process, that it's the only thing that matters to them. And they're willing to disband and disparage and hate all earlier loyalties, like to their own country. And the only people who want to see this expansion process happen in an incremental, gradual way, without giving up our old loyalties, are moderate leftists, the liberals, quote unquote. But that's their meme, and that's why they're the only ones left who still like science. It's a tragedy. It's terrible. And this is one of the reasons why I hope that we rediscover our adoration of science, because this process of expansion is going to happen because of science. As I depict in my novel Existence, we're going to resurrect Neanderthals. Can you imagine that? We're going to resurrect Neanderthals. And it's going to cause a big firestorm on both the left and the right. What about uplifting dolphins and chimps to human levels of intelligence? Both the left and the right are going to oppose it hammer and tongs. The right, we're going to be arrogating God's power. And the left, because they will declare that dolphins are already intelligent enough. And who are we to tell them how to be smart? So feeding these new intelligences that could become wonderful new sources of wisdom for our culture is going to be a fight. It's not going to come easy. And even if we do it wisely with the best of intentions, there will still be pain along the way. So people write about the dolphins, were intelligent and flying starships in Startide Rising and Uplift War. And I say, are you aware that this wonderful good thing would come after 200 years of pain? And that's what happens if you want to get a good thing. And that pain that we'll have from another horizon expansion when we include artificial intelligences as part of our civilization. And by the way, I welcome our new computer overlords.
Okay.
Because they're listening in already.
Talk about, in more general terms, what you think mankind's potential in the universe is.
If you ask me what the problems with the Fermi paradox, I think the biggest answer is that intelligence is rare, but when it shows up, it takes hold slowly. What if we had become capable of having fire and tools and spears and protecting herds of goats, but no more than that? We would have defended the goats from their predators and spread deserts all over the world, because 20% of the world's deserts were created that way by goat herds eating everything, and the predators unable to get at them because humans protected them. 20% of the world's deserts. If this had gone on for another 10,000 years, the Earth would have been a desert planet, long before we evolved to the next step and the next and the next, and finally evolved to be smart enough to say, what the hell have we done? But that isn't what happened. We got fast. The Neolithic Revolution only happened 35,000 years ago. We only got cities and agriculture 10,000 years ago. We only learned to read and write 4,000 years ago. It may be that the reason few species get out into space is that by the time they get as smart as we are, gradually, they've ruined their planet. But look at our beautiful planet. We're aware of what we're doing, possibly in time to save it. Now here's the reaction of the far left to what I just said. Boiling rage. They cannot stand the idea that humans are smart. The right insists that there's no need to be smart. Liberals say, and those few smart libertarians who abandon Ayn Rand, they say, my God, the fact that we've improved so much gives us a squeaker of a chance to make it the rest of the way. This don't try hard. This means that we might succeed, so let's try hard.
What do you propose that people who are interested in averting the kind of collapse that you discuss should be doing now?
Well, the number one thing they should do is get involved in this election, because it's absolutely important. But especially if you're outside of the United States or beyond this, I am a big believer in what's called proxy power. You can look up my essay about this by doing David Brin, Proxy Power. It's how a modern middle-class person can help save the world without having to invest too much time or money. You join non-governmental organizations that will save the world for you. Your membership fee, plus just being a member of the organization, will help empower it to get things done. So you enjoy you enjoy getting the magazine of and being part of the Electronic Freedom Foundation, which fights for freedom, Amnesty International, the Fight for the World, a number of organizations that you think needs to be done. And even if they contradict mine, just having us all sending our dues in so that experts can be fighting this fight with knowledge. I think it's the most wonderful thing. It's a way that bypasses some of the problems of democracy.
So more help for NGOs?
Yes.
Okay.
Choose NGO, the proxy power. They'll take your proxy, your money and your membership, and go and save the world in ways that you feel it ought to be saved. And there's any number of them, so you can divvy up maybe 20 of these memberships among the 20 groups that are addressing the problem you care about. If you're not doing this, then I don't want to hear any complaints from you. It's the easiest thing in the world.
Now,
and if you're part of the solution.
The imaginary world you create in existence can be used to put day-to-day crises into a broader perspective. How can you convert and maintain that perspective in the everyday world?
Well, I'm trying to show what things might be like if this, or if a certain disturbing event happened. If you come away from a science fiction novel that opens your eyes to some fresh ideas of where the world might be headed, then that would affect which of these non-governmental proxy organizations you send $20 to. I mean, what could be easier? Or it might affect how you hold conversations with others online. Maybe a more elevated conversation, not accepting some of the cliches and assertions and anecdotes that we base our politics on today. Because life is more complicated. Here's an example of a complication. If he were alive today, Adam Smith, the founder of modern capitalist theory and free market enterprise, would probably register and vote as a Democrat. If this is cognitive dissonance to you, then you have not read Adam Smith. You have not read Wealth of Nations or realized that he and our American founders fought a revolution. And it wasn't against taxes. It was against being taxed without representation by an oligarchy of aristocrats. And as soon as they took over in 1776, our founders seized every estate in the colonies that was larger than the estate of George Washington and distributed them all to the poor. Now, does that sound right-wing?
It doesn't.
It doesn't sound left-wing either, because their objective was to get yeoman farmers and blacksmiths competing with each other on a flat playing field, as Adam Smith recommended. It's neither right nor left, but belief in entrepreneurial capitalism. Now, this is off-kilter from our usual instincts and reflexes of left and right. And people need to get the reflex to go off-kilter, because The left-right political axis is lobotomizing. Do you know where we got it? We should abandon it if for no other reason, because it's French.
Right, I understand what you're saying. How does Existence differ from some of your more swashbuckling science fiction books?
Oh, well, Existence is hard science fiction. It doesn't even have warp drive. It's about the world that Einstein gave us, that Einstein, showed us. And the perplexities of the fact that life and intelligence ought to be happening all over the place. And what might be happening to it out there. And whether or not we might have a special role.
Okay, you promised at the end of the book to go back to writing more of these other stories. When can we expect some of that?
Well, I have a novel that I'm writing with a young colleague that's mostly YA. It's basically aliens kidnap a California high school and then live to regret it. That should be loads of fun. I am 2/3 done with my first science fiction comedy. And comedy is scary. Comedy is hard, so we'll see if you like that. And I have some other projects I'm going to try to get done really quickly. But the main thing, hey, I'm 62 years old. The main thing that I've been promising people for years is to go back to Tom Orley, Crikey, and the dolphins I abandoned on that planet 30 years ago. And show people what the derelict fleet was all about. I promised that, so I'm going to get to that in the next couple of years.
Okay. Is there a movie version of Existence in the works?
Oh, well, nibbles happen all the time. Sometimes the nibbles turn into options. On rare occasions, they turn into buyouts. And on super rare occasions, those buyouts become a movie. I mean, people ask me all the time what I think of Kevin Costner. Personally, not much, but I think that the movie he made of The Postman is stunningly, visually, musically gorgeous and hugely big-hearted and captured the heart message from my book. And for that, I forgive a lot, including the fact that it has not much in the way of brains. So, good things happen. But my books tend to frighten people in Hollywood because they're filled with original ideas. And if you've seen what's happened in Hollywood the last 10 years, you know that that's a cardinal sin.
So we'll have to rely on people buying the book and reading it. Who would you like to play Hamish Brookman if it's a movie?
What? Very tall and rather sarcastic. Who would that be? Maybe sort of like Hugh Grant used to be. But I don't mind not having control over who plays it. If you're going to participate in Hollywood, it's a collaborative endeavor, and I'm not an expert on that sort of thing. Though if you take a look at my graphic novels, I'm becoming a little better versed at this. After 3 graphic novels, writing a graphic novel and telling the artist what to include in a particular panel and in this panel, it's a lot like writing and directing a movie. And I feel I have some experience at that now. But in addition, there are changes taking place. Like books have trailers now. And I invite people to come by my website, davidbrin.com, and look at the trailers that my wife made for Heart of the Comet and Glory Season, but especially the incredible, lavish, gorgeous trailer for Existence that the great Patrick Farley made. And then you have what's going to be called the animated storyboard. And we're on the verge of this right now, where with image capture and computer programs, a musician, an expert at the program, a cinematographer, 5 guys can work with a writer and create a 90-minute movie that's crudely animated, but with all the voices. And it's been proved by psychologists that you can have figures if the music is good and the dialogue is good and the voices are strongly emotional, that you get 90% of the emotion in the audience that you would have from a fully acted movie.
So you might make Existence that way?
Oh, no. Existence needs special effects. Existence deserves special effects. But a rough draft, perhaps. That would be fun. But technology is going to transform Hollywood. It's going to transform media. And when it happens, the writer is going to be more important than he is now.
Okay, well, you're pretty important already, and I want to thank you for using your writerly skills to create Existence and for talking about it with us today on Utopia News.
It's my pleasure. Best to your audience, and let's all hope civilization becomes more confident and scientific in the future.
Yes, thank you very much.